Well, it's great to be here, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and have hopefully what I hope is a conversation about some of the issues and concerns that are important to you. And from my perspective, for those that I've not had the opportunity to meet, I'll just give you a little bit of background about me, and then we'll dive into kind of what's happening in the country today, and more specifically, I hope it's going to be open for questions from you about the things that are most important to you and what you're concerned about. So for me, I'm born and raised in the area. Went to New Trier High School. I have 3 kids. I run a small business right down the road. I'm in the pest control business. We've been in business for about 154 years. So we'd like to be in business for another 154 years. But ultimately, this is about, as I'm out traveling around, listening to people and talking to them about the issues and concerns that are most important to them. The thing that continues to come up is still about jobs and the economy. Still the number one thing. People are saying, look, we've got a huge problem. We've got the 3rd highest unemployment in the state of Illinois. We've got a lot of people that have left the rolls or that are underemployed. How do we bring more good, high-paying jobs here to Illinois? Certainly that's still the number one issue. We'll talk more about a Main Street Jobs agenda as well. The other thing that's important, I think, as we listen to folks, is people are concerned cost of food, cost of filling up their car with fuel, cost of higher education. So for many of your grandchildren that are potentially going off to college, the cost of higher education continues to rise well beyond inflation. The uncertainty around retirement is another big concern. And so again, all of these things right now, when I go out and I ask the question, what's keeping you up at night? These are some of the responses that we get on a fairly regular basis. So we've got obviously issues domestically, we've got issues internationally, and ultimately I think it boils down to something I call leadership. We have nobody talks about the leadership deficit that we have today in Washington or Springfield. We hear a lot about the jobs deficit, the fiscal deficit, but not nearly enough about the leadership deficit. And that leadership deficit, I believe, oftentimes requires you to do things that might be unpopular. I look at things like the budget. Right? For the first time in a generation, there was a bipartisan budget that was proposed on the House floor in the 112th Congress. 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats co-sponsored the first bipartisan budget in a generation, based upon Simpson-Bowles Deficit Reduction Commission. It had some things in there that a lot of people didn't like, right? Because again, we understand right now that you're not going to solve this problem simply by taxing our way out or by cutting spending and doing that. So it's going to require some of both. Well, I was one of the Republicans that co-sponsored that budget. It took a lot of heat from people on the right saying, what are you doing? My response is trying to solve a huge problem. Because ultimately, we don't solve the big problems unless we can tackle some of these things. And ultimately, Alan Simpson, the Republican senator from Wyoming, was one of the co-chairs. Erskine Bowles, President Clinton's chief of staff, right? Definitely folks on either side of the aisle said that this is what we can best propose in order to solve these problems. Isn't that what you're looking for? So from my perspective, it's about sticking your neck out, something I call the turtle principle. You've got to stick your neck out if you want to move forward. And that's something that I've been able to demonstrate. We were ranked the most independent bipartisan member of the 112th Congress. Some people think that's bad. I happen to think that's the right way to go. As someone that meets a budget and a payroll and has done deals, the idea that you're able to work across the aisle or work across the table with someone, and it's not all going to be one way or another. There's going to have to be give and take. Because if there's not give and take, it's going to be a very short conversation. So certainly something that I'm passionate about. So as we go back and we talk, let me just talk real briefly about some of the things about jobs. And then we'll open it up and talk about questions. When people say, okay, what are you going to do about jobs? I'll say, look, we live in an area today, here. If you just look around outside, we have all of the assets to be leading the country as opposed to bringing up the rear. Illinois' got a credit rating right now the same as Kazakhstan. That's not good, in case you wanted to know. We've got a great place to raise a family. And if you're going to start your business today, the things that you might look for, is this a great place to raise a family? Say absolutely it is. How about, do I have access to top quality talent? Take a ride down 294. Abbott, Advent, Baxter, Takeda, Astellas, Dow, Kraft, Walgreens. We've got access to top quality talent. We actually live in probably the most highly educated congressional district in the country. So that's another big plus. How about our educational institutions? Some of the best educational institutions around. So when you're talking about trying to educate your family, a great place to raise your family. And good research and development institutions, University of Chicago and Northwestern and Loyola and others. Professors and students, I think we've got about 204,000 college students that are in the greater area. How about our natural resources? Incredible natural resources, the jewel of our ecosystem right over here in the Great Lakes. So this is really a great place if I was to set up a business today. And the other thing that we don't talk about is the competitive advantage that we have with our infrastructure. We are actually a hub. If you look at the map in the city of Chicago, and you look at the roads and the rail and the waterways and our airports, this is a great place to set up a business. What are we missing?
Low taxes.
We're missing a business-friendly environment. We all know businesses that have picked up and gone to Wisconsin, or people that have left to go to Indiana or Florida or other places like that. Right? But we know they're not going to Wisconsin because of the weather. Right? That's one we can check off the box. We know that's the case. So ultimately, it's about how do we create a business-friendly environment here that attracts those businesses here, brings more good, high-paying jobs right here in Northern Illinois. Rahm Emanuel gets it in the sense that he wants to attract businesses to go to the city of Chicago. Right? He puts out the press release, and anytime a business comes into the city of Chicago, he's out there cheering, as he should. But he's not bringing those businesses in from New York or California or Iowa or Wisconsin. He's bringing them in from places like Lake County. So this is kind of what we're up against. And we should have, and I believe have the opportunity to be leading the charge here in the state of Illinois, because we have the assets. We actually have an opportunity to do so. And frankly, as we look from a global perspective, we're not competing with Indiana and Wisconsin alone. We're competing across the globe. Right? Today, the world is flatter than it's ever been. Right? How do we attract foreign direct investment? How do we deal with the immigration problem so that we can attract and maintain the best and the brightest here in our nation? These are some of the things that I think are vitally important for us, and are not things that I want to run from. But I believe that we've got to run at, tackle these problems, because they're not problems that are going away. So listen, I can talk for a long time about a lot of things. I'd much prefer to talk to you about the issues and concerns that you have, whether that be stuff about the VA, whether that be, yes sir.
I don't know much about your political path. Are you currently engaged actively in politics? Are you considering running? What is your status right now in politics?
That is a fantastic question. So what is my status in politics right now? I was your member of Congress here for 2 years. The redistricting happened. We lost narrowly by about 0.7 percentage point. And we are currently running to restore your voice and to be your member of Congress again. So that's November, you'll have that decision to make. Yes, sir.
You spoke about tax reduction. We are currently on the end of what was called a recession. That was called by the Republicans under Bush. Bush is responsible for what we saw as almost the bankruptcy of the United States of America. By first of all, reducing taxes. Secondly, by putting us into a war that was unjustified and unnecessary, and never bothering to increase the financing for that war. Now, do you want to continue Bush's economic policies which saw the financial markets running them up, bankers running them up. Are you going to continue that, or are you willing to go against what the Republicans have been going for, which is lower taxes without many recompense?
Okay, so for those that weren't able to hear the gentleman, the question is just what are my views with regard to taxes and tax policy and the like. I, for one, believe that under the Bush administration, we spent too much, right? So when I talk about spending, and I talk to young people, and I look at the $17 trillion in debt, I'm not one that points at one side and says, those are the guys that made this happen, right? There's plenty of spending that went on the Republican side and the Democratic side as well. So the question is, what do we do about it? And the thing that we're not talking about is we're not talking about growth, right? And I'm confident that there's no doubt that you're probably one of those that does not, if you believe like I do, you don't want Walgreens to pick up and go and move its headquarters over to Switzerland. Would you concur that you don't want, or you don't?
That's not the point. The point is the Republicans want to reduce taxes and don't want to do it in a way which requires, because what we require is to increase taxes of the wealthy back to where it was under Clinton.
Okay. Well, what I will point to is something that I've already done, okay? And that's actually put my name on a bipartisan budget that actually did raise revenues, right? So it did talk about raising taxes and cutting spending and doing so in a responsible manner. So what I want to do is kind of step back a little bit and trying to say, he's for advancing the Bush policies. I'm for solving problems, right? And what I want to get away from, again, I was ranked as the most independent bipartisan member of the 112th Congress. That means we work with the other side of the aisle. That means we embrace the things that we try to solve problems. Ultimately, I'm a believer that we don't get things done unless we have some Democratic support, because it's got to pass the Senate and go to the president's desk for signature, right? So from my perspective, do I think that raising taxes is the right approach? I'm not necessarily so sure that that's not. If we take a look at what's happened and what's going on in Illinois, we're seeing businesses pick up and leave and go other places. So we're trying to bring more dollars into the federal treasury? I am. I do believe that the government has an obligation to try to do very succinct things and to try to help those in a social safety net, for instance, that can't help themselves. But we're talking about it, I think, in sometimes the wrong instance. We should be talking about how do we grow our economy so that more dollars come into the federal treasury.
Against raising taxes on the wealthy.
And again, I will go back and point to you as saying I actually co-sponsored a budget that talked about raising revenues.
That's not answering the question.
But it is answering the question. So basically what it said is that we would raise taxes if that was necessary to do. But it's not going to be just raising taxes without cutting spending.
What is your opinion?
Should you or should you not raise taxes? It depends where and on whom. So, right? So if you go back and look at for instance, Simpson Bowles, that's something that we supported. That's something that a lot of Republicans did not support because it talked about raising taxes. We actually put our name and said we supported that. So that's very succinct. Okay? You can go and take a look at it. Right? It's on paper. So I would disagree if you think that we've avoided that, because we didn't. Yes, sir.
Contrast the economy difference between Illinois and Texas. Why are they flourishing and we're dying?
I think if you look at it, and again, people that are advocating for larger, more expansive government say, hold on a second, we're running the experiment in Illinois. So if you want to raise taxes 66% on individuals, 48% on businesses, we can just take a look at what's happening. And again, it's not good, right? We're not growing businesses here in the state of Illinois. If you go down to Texas, that economy is growing by leaps and bounds. And really what it is it's a mentality of saying we want those businesses here. Because each and every one of you has an individual economy, right, that revolves around you and your family. And you know what? If it's not here, if it's down in Florida or Texas or some other place, those are the people you're buying bread and milk and filling your car up with fuel and you're You're going to the movies and out to dinner and all those things. And those are dollars that, again, will help grow an economy wherever you are. We're seeing those businesses, for instance, in Texas, that are growing wildly. And from my perspective, I think that's very, very important that we try to turn that around because, as we talked about earlier, Illinois has the assets to be able to do that. It's just that it seems that there are barriers in front of growing your business left and right here in the state of Illinois. And I hear it every day from small businesses, from Northbrook to Fox Lake to Zion. Yes, sir.
What's your position on immigration reform?
I am for immigration reform. I think it's absolutely critical that we have immigration.
Everybody's for something good. What specific ways are you?
What specific ways? Well, I think that if we look, for instance, at Ronald Reagan, right? That's the last real immigration reform that happened. I believe that we've got to be able to take the 12 million people that are here, be able to get them to come out of the shadows, be contributing members of our community, being able to put down roots, be able to invest in our communities. I think that's positive. We have to make sure that we're protecting our borders, which is important. It's a national security issue. We have to deal with the H-1B visa situation because right now, today, we're educating the best and the brightest from all over the world. And as soon as they graduate with that master's degree or a PhD, what do? We kick them out to go compete against us. That's the last thing that we want to do. We want them to stay here and create the next new patent here. Right? So that they're helping to grow and create more American jobs. So there's a lot of different aspects. And we have to fix the legal process. Right now, for someone to wait 15 years to be able to come into the United States, frankly, is far too long. And so we need to make sure that we're fixing the legal process. We're dealing with the folks that are here to allow them to be able to be contributing members of our community and be able to stay here. And we need to be dealing with the border as well. So I think that there's a number of different things. And I believe that there's some common ground out there to be able to get people on the right and left together, be able to move policy forward. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I really like the fact that you're supporting Simpson Bowles rather than Paul Ryan's budget, because that kind of scares me. Particularly with the Ryan budget, with privatizing Social Security and voucherizing Medicare and everything else. With the Simpson Bowles and that you're supporting and your positions in general, how are you looking to shore up Social Security and Medicare?
Listen, first of all, Social Security and Medicare are things that you've paid into, right? So, for instance, those of you in the room have paid into Social Security and Medicare, and you should be able to rely on them. I, for one, believe that we need to make sure that they're around for the long haul. Do you want your children to have them? By Sean, everybody wants their children to have Social Security and Medicare? How many of you would be willing to have 73 cents on the dollar for your children for Social Security and Medicare? Anybody?
73 cents.
73 cents on the dollar. Anybody okay with that? Well, that's what happens if we do nothing. If we do nothing, it's going to 73 cents on the dollar. Social Security, when it was enacted, life expectancy was 62. You collected your benefits at 65. That is a great business model. Right? That's a great business model. And those that collected benefits back when it was enacted collected on average 11 months worth of benefits. Anybody want to guess what it is today? It's 22 years. That's a great thing. That's a fantastic thing that we're living longer lives. We just have to make sure that it is around and stable. It was 30 workers to one recipient back when it was active. It's 3 to 1 going to 2 to 1 quickly. I do believe if you're talking about, how do we make sure that it's around for the long haul, I think that you can't do anything from my perspective that will impact current seniors, people that are in the system. Right now, we've had $150 billion taken out of Medicare Advantage, which is impacting seniors right now today. $700 billion will be taken out of Medicare in total. Right? I think that's wrong. So, from my perspective, on a Social Security type situation, you go to someone that's 54 and say, will you give us an extra 3 months? Will you work an extra 3 months before you're eligible to take benefits? You go to someone that's 53 and you say, will you give us 5 months or whatever else, whatever the actuaries say it may be. But there's a way to do it gradually to be able to make sure that it does cash flow, that we're getting, not 73 cents on the dollar, but $1 for the dollar on Social Security and Medicare. And to make sure that this social safety net that is so important, because a social safety net, from my perspective, is a measure of a country and how well we take care of those that can't take care of themselves. Yes, sir.
If you were a congressman today,
Uh-huh.
would you vote for the billions that Obama's asking for?
Would I vote for the
Billions of dollars that Obama's asking for?
for the border?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that he originally was talking about $2 billion, and I think it's up to like 3.8 or almost $4 billion. There's no question that we've got a humanitarian crisis down at the border, as we're looking at thousands and thousands of young children, unaccompanied children down there, and they're not coming from Mexico. Some are, but the vast majority are coming from South America and Central America. And the law of the land right now is that those are refugees and that they're here to stay. And so I do think that we need to have the resources down there, and we need to fix that problem. And that's a leadership problem as well, to make sure that the President's talking to Central American or South American counterparts to stop the stem of these refugees that are coming across the border. So that's got to be part of it. But in the meantime, what are we doing with them now? You've got to be able to give them the resources to be able to solve the problem or service the need. Yes?
Didn't Bush sign a bill saying that all the children have political asylum, though?
Yes. He did. Which is why they're legally here, because they're refugees. They're not coming from just the neighboring country over. That's absolutely correct. Yes, sir.
Congress has a terrible rating.
Yes, it does.
And the relationship between the Republicans and the Democrats is pathetically bad.
It is.
How can one change that?
Okay, so the rating, it said the question was, is the rating for Congress is terribly bad, and Republicans and Democrats don't get along, so how do you change that? Well, I think the rating right now, I think, is 7% approval rating. I think Al-Qaeda has a higher approval rating, to be honest. I think once you eliminate paid staff and blood relatives, it's a 0. But ultimately, as we look at what we need to be doing to get Republicans and Democrats together, it's about leading by example. Everything I did in the United States Congress was with bipartisan support. And part of that's trying to make sure that we're getting out and talking to people about the things that they're interested in, because oftentimes, I am confident that the gentleman back here who disagrees with me on probably a lot of things, I'm confident we can sit down together and find things that we agree on. And if we focus on the areas of agreement, we've got a chance to do something. Right? And I'm also confident that I could find the most conservative person here, we could sit down and we can find something that we disagree on. If we focus on areas of disagreement, we go nowhere. And unfortunately today in Washington, we've created a situation where a win for one side is a loss for the other. And ultimately, from my perspective, the real losers are the American public. So we're not talking about putting party differences aside, putting people before the politics, which is something that I've focused on. So, I will tell you that part of it is being able to lead and take arrows, but part of it's going to be focusing on areas of agreement. Because right now, today, we need to talk about how do we get things done. And right now, it's I don't want to say poisonous, but it's really bad in Washington today. And one of the things that makes it as bad as it is the redistricting. Redistricting reform is something that I think has to happen across the country. Republicans want to create a locked Republican district. A locked Republican district means that no matter who runs, we're going to send a Republican to Congress. The Democrats want to create the locked Democratic districts. So again, out of the 435 races for Congress this year, there's going to be about 40 competitive House races. That's it. Less than 10%. Well, frankly, I don't think that's a good thing. I think that we ought to have more competitive races, more 50-50 type districts. And again, both sides equally guilty on this stuff. And so if we can create more 50-50 districts, guess what? You could have more people that have to listen to the other side. Now let me ask you a question that I think you'd be interested in just your take. If you're looking for someone, well, first of all, do you want a representative to be more in the middle? Who wants them to be more to the, who wants them to be more left? They want to be, we're more right. Okay, let me ask you a question. This is a democratically leaning district. Do you think you're going to have someone more centrist as a Republican in a democratically leaning district? Or a Democrat in a Democrat leaning district? Food for thought. Do you think that would be putting me more in the center?
Say that you get elected. I come from a party right now, and I'm an independent moderate.
Sure.
Far to the right, Tea Party, whatnot. How do you convince these people to come your way where maybe we get something done in Congress?
Sure.
That happened now. Now a small group of your party is holding back everything.
The extremist ends of either side, I think the vast majority of the public lives between what I call the 30-yard lines. Okay, the vast majority of the people probably put yourself in that regard. And yet most of the tension is being placed in the red zones on either end. From my perspective, it's the wrong way to go. And let me just give you an example. There was a continuing resolution back in 2011 that talked about trying to keep the government open, and we were going to have an agreement with the Senate to do kind of an agreed upon number of $1,028 billion. So 1028 was the number. We had some people that came in and said, we think we can do it for 1019. Well, I'd like to save $9 billion like the next guy. Right? Okay, but the agreed upon number that we had with the Democrats in the Senate was 1028. I said, well, we think we can do it for 1019, so we're going to do it for 1019. Well, guess what happened? They put 1028 on the floor. It failed because we had a group of folks that said, no, we want to do it 1019. And then Steny Hoyer, after it failed, walked across the floor and said, guess what? We've got a new number. It's now 1048. So a lot of the Republicans had said, hey, you know what? I mean, we're in a fiscal crisis. We don't want to spend an extra $20 billion. I was for 1028, but I can't go back to my constituents and say I'm for 1048. So they came to folks like me and said, Bob, we need your help. We need to make sure that this passes because we can't shut the government down. I said, well, what makes you think that my constituents want to spend an extra $20 billion more as well? And I said, okay, we're not going to shut the government down. But what we did is we went and talked to some of these guys that now a bigger chunk of folks said, no, I'm not going to vote for 1048, but it passed. Right? Because that was a new number. So 1048 was the new number. And I went to some of these guys and I said, guess what? You just spent an extra $20 billion. They said, I didn't spend an extra $20 billion. I said, yes, you did. It's exactly what you just did. You spent an extra $20 billion of the taxpayers' money. Because had you gone around with 1028, that would have passed. But they said, well, I didn't vote for it. And I said, but you effectively just spent $20 billion more. So part of it's going to them and trying to convince them on some of those things. There's a lot of people that want or think they can solve the world's problems with a single vote. It's not the way it's going to happen. It has to be incremental, and it's going to have to be, from my perspective, a bipartisan approach to do it. Yes, sir.
We have been reading about major financial contributors such as the Coast Guard, the Republican organizations that are fighting against trying to mitigate global warming. So what do we do about the money that's being poured in to fight people who want to reduce global warming? How do you handle that?
Well, the question was how do we fight people that are putting money in to fight global warming? That's right?
To fight against the people who are trying to mitigate.
Yeah, so in essence, how do we solve or how do we deal with big money donors that are trying to put dollars in to fight against people fighting against global warming? Or I assume other things as well, right? Big money donors coming into the political process. And this stems from, a Supreme Court decision that when it came out, I said was going to be very bad for the political process. So from my perspective, when you're talking about huge outside dollars coming in and influencing elections, I think it's bad. I think it's bad because I think really what it does is it takes your voice away, right? It minimizes what you're interested in and your ability to influence the political process. So how do we fight against it? I don't know if there's a lawsuit that comes up and it gets overturned, or we talk about campaign finance reform, or those types of things. I don't know, but I do think that it's taken a turn, and certainly turned for the worse. As Citizens United.
Global warming.
Was your question about campaign finance or global warming?
Global warming. No. Generally, the Koch brothers are supporting Republican groups that are fighting against science, is what it comes down to.
Okay. So is your question about how do we deal with global warming, or how do we deal with the money situation?
Both, because it's
Okay.
money that's fighting the battle, fighting science.
Yeah, there's no question about it, that right now it's the dollars that people can use to get out there and advocate against whatever they believe in or don't believe in, and support candidates and put stuff out there and negative ads and the like, and the other side's doing the same thing. They're coming out and they're using big dollars.
Specifically said global warming.
Okay, I don't know what you want me to do with regard to, it's the dollars that are the concern, but if you want to talk about global warming, it's the science that's out there on global warming. And it's going to be the individual voters that are going to be talking about, do we elect people or do we not elect people, right? So it's going to be up to the voters on this kind of stuff, you know.
How do you feel about it?
Okay, that's a totally different question. And I believe that, again, I believe in the science out there. There's no question that man-made functions are impacting our environment. What do we do about them? I think it's basically incumbent on us to try to reduce where we can our carbon footprint. I think, again, a different approach that I would take is I would go at the businesses at a business approach to say that this allows you to reduce your carbon footprint, get your return on your investment, whether it be how you're lighting things, your coal scrubbers, whatever it is that you're able to do to be able to reduce our carbon footprint, be able to reduce those types of things in a business, make a business case for it. And I think you can do that. Yes, sir.
Obama has single-handedly ruined the economy of the coal-producing states of West Virginia and Virginia with this insignificant restriction on a pseudoscience that hasn't been proved. I hear people screaming global warming. This globe has been here for years and years. We've had periods of cold and periods of heat. Under previous administrations, there was always dissension among the two parties, but there wasn't the divisiveness that this president has introduced to this country, and frankly, I'm sick of it.
Okay. No question that the divisiveness amongst the political parties in general has spiraled south and declined. Would everybody agree that things are far more divisive today than they've been ever? And from my perspective, I think there's probably plenty of blame to go around. And really, for my kids, right? Because ultimately that's why we do this. People often ask, why in the world would you ever want to run for Congress? It's a completely dysfunctional organization. You don't even have the excuse that you don't know what it's like. Well, let me tell you why. I refuse to believe that our best days aren't ahead of us. And I believe it requires leadership. And frankly, I am terribly concerned that we're at a crossroads right now where I may be the first generation of Americans that leaves our country worse for my children than I received from my parents. For me, that's just unacceptable. You've lived up to the American compact that you're leaving the country better off for your children. I want to make sure that my generation does the same. Listen, I have to tell you, I would love to be able to spend more time with my kids, 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and 7-year-old. I'm going to spend more time in my business. I'll take the time away from those things to be able to try to move forward in the country. If you want someone to go name post office, vote for the other guy. Right? If you want someone to go to Washington to actually roll up their sleeves and actually try to tackle problems, to work in a bipartisan fashion, and you know what? You don't even have to take my word for it. You can look at the record. But I'm asking for your help and support. Yes, sir.
What makes you think that if you get elected, you can change the speaker's stance about doing nothing while Obama's president? Republicans have refused to cooperate. The Tea Party won't do anything. They did shut the government down. Why would you be able to change what would cause?
They certainly did shut the government down when I was there. I'll say that.
They did shut it down.
They shut it down this term, yes. Right? And I believe that it's incumbent upon members of Congress to be able to set differences aside to work forward for the American
Bipartisan
public.
resolution.
What's
It's gotta
that?
be bipartisan. It's gotta be, we gotta work together to make this country state be great as it
The
is.
Tea Party doesn't want to do that. So they have refused any time to cooperate with the president. And the way Congress has the votes, you'll never get anything passed there.
Well, I certainly like to think that we will get stuff passed, that we would get things done. And part of it, again, is working in a bipartisan way to try to move things forward, putting the people first, right? And ultimately, the people, back to redistricting reform, that's a huge part of it. But ultimately, right now, they're hearing from their constituents too. We need to move forward as a country. We need to get things done, because in the absence of getting things done, people are hurting right now. And we've got to come up with
Any
solutions to
fights
these
about
problems.
give and take.
There's got to be give and take.
The governor doesn't do it.
What's that?
Your speaker doesn't do that.
Well, we have to, right? So we will put things on the floor. And again, as a freshman, we had 2 pieces of legislation that went to the president's desk, right? Passed a lot of different things. And it certainly passed stuff out of the House. Every piece of it was with bipartisan support. Yes, sir.
So who do you think the Republicans will put up president next time?
Who do I think the Republicans will put up for president? I have no idea who the Republicans are going to put up for president. I think the Democrats likely are going to put up Hillary Clinton, and you might see Elizabeth Warren make her run as well. That's at least the only people we've heard. There's a guy, I think, from Montana or something like that may also be out there. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a question about foreign policy.
Yes, sir.
Do you think Obama's doing the right thing about participating or not participating in what's going on in Iraq right now? He's trying to have a hand in there, and the other hand is something else.
So the question
Do you
is,
feel any different?
the question is on foreign policy, and specifically what's happening over in Iraq right now. And I'd like to, if we can, first of all, take a step back and take a look at why we're here and what's going on. And I think that certainly what we're seeing right now is we see an absence of leadership. The world is asking, where's America? And that doesn't mean that we're putting 100,000 boots on the ground, because frankly, we're not going to do that, and I don't think we should. But if we just take a look at the absence of leadership, someone's going to rush to fill that void. In that power vacuum, someone will rush in. We look at what's happening in China today with the no-fly zone, right? North Korea fires missiles at South Korean exercises. Putin goes into the Ukraine and Crimea. We've got 160,000 dead in Syria. We've got, obviously, what's happening in Iraq. And what's interesting, if you look at what's happening in Iraq, is that there was talk in the administration about reaching out to who to help? Iran? Are you kidding? The greatest threat we have to our own national security here, a nuclear-armed Iran. In the absence of that leadership, people will rush to fill the void, and I think it's creating a far more dangerous place. So I do think that a status of forces agreement needed to be put in place. I know that the Bush administration was the one that set this in place. I think that was wrong. And I think as things change, this administration should have had a status of forces agreement for Iraq, so that this type of a thing didn't spiral out of control. Not to be there as necessarily a military force, but peacekeeping, which is what we still have a status of forces in Germany, in Japan, in North Korea.
How many countries can we have our hands in?
Well, we can have our hand in a lot of different places, and we do, and it's actually it's an advantage for us tactically to be able to have troops in certain places, but it's not going to be active.
Germany all these years since World War II.
I think we have just active bases there. So it really allows us to deploy if we need to places further faster. So, I mean, it's like having a base in the U.S., but it happens to be in Germany. So that's what's going on. So from my perspective, the 300 peacekeepers that are out there, or the 300 advisors, I don't know if 300 advisors is going to be enough, but we do need to make sure that the Iraqis have the stuff that they need in terms of the equipment and the manpower. The training, obviously, what we're hearing back is that the training that they received has gone out the window, and a lot of the U.S. folks are alarmed at how little they were able to retain.
Some of our military implements, the tanks and the trucks, it's all in the hands of the ISIS.
A lot of stuff that ISIS has come in and kind of taken over a lot of a few of those cities in Iraq.
We know.
Yeah.
Right. Billions have been spent. Now
Yeah.
it's in the hands of the enemy. So what to do about it?
Well, I think at this stage of the game, we've got to talk about, we put 300 advisors on the ground, try to figure out what's happening. I don't think that's probably going to be enough. I don't know what's going to happen or what their plan of attack is. What's that?
It's going to be 700 advisors soon.
It'll be 700 advisors soon. I don't doubt that. Yes, ma'am.
What's your stand on Israel at the moment?
What's my stand on Israel at the moment? Well, I think it's tragic what's happened in Israel. And frankly, I'm alarmed because each and every one of us has friends or family over in Israel right now, and we see the violence escalating. I certainly think that when you look at the unity government, I think it's incumbent upon the United States to make sure that we set a very clear standard that we will not fund a unity government that has Hamas as part of it. It is a terrorist organization, plain and simple, that wants the destruction of the state of Israel. And from my perspective, that is not someone that the United States should be propping up or sending resources to in any way, shape, or form. And certainly, I think what's interesting is that the violence and the outbreaks, and again, the Palestinian boy that was burned to death. Well, guess what? The Israelis have apprehended 6 people with regard in connection with that death. Not so on the 3 Israelis that were killed, the teenage boys, one of whom is an American as well. So from my perspective, this is our one true ally, one that needs to have a quantitative and qualitative military edge. They have to know that the United States will be there for them unequivocally. And frankly, my concern is that their concern right now, will the United States be there? Because our allies necessarily don't trust us, our enemies don't fear us. Yes, sir.
I want to go back to Iraq.
Okay.
The Shiites and the Sunnis have been fighting each other for many, many years. The vice president suggested that we let Iraq divide into 3 areas and let them work it out themselves. A Shiite area, a Sunni area, and a Kurdish area.
The Kurds.
Why don't we let it be? Because what Iraq now is an inappropriate country that was created by the French and the British.
Yeah. I don't know the answer why that we won't let them cut it up. I don't know. But I know that there's been atrocities that have happened out there to the Kurds and everybody else. So, yes, sir.
Do you feel that we should have been bombing ISIS more in the sense that when you say what the gentleman just said about having it in 3 areas, you see what's going, the Islamization of Iraq, and they're even putting the United States on it hard and everything, and I see that as alarming. And I don't remember the guy's name that was talking in Iraq now, but as I understood it, he was let go from, I think, during the Bush administration, where we had him and we released him, and I don't know why we're letting why it got to be so big, this ISIS. What's your feeling on that?
Well, there's a couple of things that you mentioned in terms of certainly when we released folks, and there was a gentleman that the Bush administration, I shouldn't say gentleman, terrorist that the Bush administration let out of Guantanamo Bay. And what happened as soon as he returned, his stock went way high because in the terrorist organization, he's not going to be one of the leaders. And what we found is recently, 5 generals, in essence, were let out of Guantanamo Bay, and every single one of them most likely is going to have their sights turned on Americans the next day, and America. And frankly, I think that's the wrong approach. These are folks that are known terrorists that have been put on a do not release list for very good reason. And as we look at what's happening, again, there are more terrorists today that are focusing on the United States and Americans abroad. And frankly, I think that the negotiation, happy that Obergall is home, but I think that the cost out there was significant.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, but we shouldn't have done it. And yet I also think about with Israel, they'll release 1,000 to get one, even a dead body back. And I never understood that either. You know?
Well, I don't understand that either.
Yeah, that's it. See,
but again, you've got to talk about a
Yeah,
sovereign
right.
nation making decisions
Yeah.
for a sovereign nation. And so as much as they are our true ally, we have to let them make the decisions that they believe best for their nation. And where it might not be a decision that I would make,
Yeah, and it's a
that they
decision that mostly affects them.
Yeah.
People let out don't affect us as much as their country.
Right. Right. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you were around at the beginning of the Vietnam War, but France told us to stay out. And we sent in advisors, 300. And I can't help but believe that we're getting sucked in Iraq, the same as we got sucked in with Vietnam to no avail.
Yeah.
What's your opinion?
Yeah.
What is your opinion about sending more reinforcements, supervisors
To Iraq.
to Iraq?
Well, I think certainly we've deployed to Iraq and we pulled folks out. And so we need to make sure that the troops there, the local Iraqi officials and troops, need to be able to defend their nation. And if we need to talk about some airstrikes or those types of things, that's different than boots on the ground.
The local Iraqi military is supported by Iran.
Which is a huge
Sunnis
problem.
have been run out. And this guy Maliki, or whatever his name is,
Maliki.
yeah, is an Iranian, a Shiite, and he's going to suppress this country until eventually Iran does what Iraq couldn't do in all those years of war, and they're going to take over Iraq, and that's going to be the Islamic State of Iraq. What do you think about
They're
that?
going to use our arms that we've been supplying Iraq.
I think it's a very dangerous place. And I think that it's going to spiral out of control and we cannot allow Iran. That's really one of my greatest concerns is Iran right now. And a nuclear armed Iran who has said time and again that they want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. They want to drive them to the sea, that they are the little Satan. Well, who's the big Satan? And we're the big Satan. Right here, our way of life, our freedoms. If you think they're going to stop with Israel, let me tell you they're not. And so that's a huge concern for me, which is, again, why it's important that the United States step up and lead. Now, having not gotten any briefings on what's happening over there, I certainly am not one to say we're going to put 50,000 troops back on the ground in Iraq.
We're leading from behind.
And leading from behind does not work. You had a question, sir?
I was going to say, changing continents, what about the terrorists that captured those 200 girls? They're terrorists,
No question.
so what are we doing there?
Well, I mean,
Anything?
in terms of the 200 girls, and I do not know where it stands right now with getting them back, obviously it's a humanitarian crisis. They kidnapped these girls. We need to be able to put, and again, if you think about the resources that we put in trying to find an airplane, right? Think about how much that dominated the news and how many resources were put into that airplane. We're talking about 200 lives of young women, and we should be talking about how do we find them and bring them home safely. And that's a great humanitarian need for the United States, and something the United States can't step up and help with.
Are we doing anything to help capture that terrorist?
Well, the answer is, I'm sure, yes. We are doing stuff to try to help capture those terrorists. And again, those are the types of things that aren't necessarily on the front pages of the newspaper. Those are things that are being done behind the scenes as they should be. Yes, sir.
Final question. What do you think we should do with this poor Marine who's being held in Mexico and our government is doing absolutely, it appears on the outset, nothing?
From my perspective, that's a phone call. The President of the United States needs to pick up the phone, call the President of Mexico and say, it appears that we've got a miscommunication here. You've got one of our soldiers. We'd like to have him back right now, please. It seems to me that would be a fairly simple conversation. And the fact that it's not done, the fact that a Marine who was sitting across the border, and just, again, across the border, he had some guns that he had licenses for. He's sitting over in a prison over in Mexico. He should be back immediately. Right? Now, again, it doesn't mean he can't be held accountable if he's broken the law or something along those lines. But to be sitting in a Mexican prison, we need to say we'd like him back, please, now. And that, I think, is a phone call here from Secretary of State or from the President. When we take yes, sir.
What's your opinion on Snowden? Is he a whistleblower or what?
I think Edward Snowden should be tried for treason. I do not believe that he is a patriot. I believe that he will end up causing the death of a lot of Americans for a long time, and for billions and billions of dollars that he has jeopardized and in essence cost our intelligence agency, because it wasn't just a couple of those things. It was a download that now the Chinese, the Russians, and everybody has.
Do you think we'll get him back here?
I don't know if we'll get him back here at all, but I certainly do not hold him up as a patriot for our nation. I think that he has caused a significant amount of damage that we will not recover from for a long time. And if you don't believe that we're in the middle of a cyber war, let me just tell you that we are. There are 300,000 attacks on banks every day. The NSA, the Secret Service, the FBI view networks for businesses out there as those that have already been hacked and those that will be hacked shortly. So this is, again, we've already had the greatest transfer of wealth in intellectual property. It's already happened. It's already been stolen. It's happened in the Department of Defense. It's happened in other places. So there's no question that this is something that's very serious, and this activity by Snowden has made it worse and has really put us back from our intelligence, gathering, and from our intelligence agencies, and it's going to jeopardize the lives of Americans.
Your candidacy will be in what area? What area are you running in now that everything has been redistributed? Where are you going to be running?
Well, this area, for instance, is one that we would cover. So Northbrook goes from Glenview up to Zion, up to the state line. We go down and get 3/4 of Gurney, goes all the way out to Fox Lake, comes back down and drops down. We get the northern part of Des Plaines, half of Glenview.
In Lincolnshire?
We have Lincolnshire.
Yeah, Buffalo Road.
We have the north of Lake Cook, Lake County side of Buffalo Road. Yes, sir.
How can the statistics of the cost of living be 1.3% when the reality of the situation is considerably more? Your cost of food, your cost of gasoline, etc., are much higher, 1.3%.
The short answer for that is that they don't include food and fuel in those things.
They just eliminated anything.
Those are outside of when they make the calculation. They do not factor in food. And again, we all remember pushing the grocery cart to the car, leaning into the grocery cart, trying to push it to the car. Today, you can do it with the same amount of money as 2 grocery bags. And filling up your automobile with fuel. What's that?
I just did this morning.
You just did it this morning. I mean, it's unbelievable.
What is a poor working man? How can he drive?
Well, what happened is they're not taking that vacation. They're not going away for the 4th of July weekend. They're saving their fuel to be able to get to work. So in terms of the cost of living, they don't factor food or fuel, which frankly is astounding because those are two of the staples that most people live on, especially those on a fixed
Now,
income.
what do they use in the calculation?
What's that?
What do they use in the calculation?
I am not sure what all goes into the calculation. All I do know is that when I've asked about why in the world it's only gone up that short or small amount, I talk about food and fuel all the time, and they say, well, that's not part of it. Which all of a sudden I say, okay, well, now I understand. Because the basic staples that many of you are dealing with each and every day is fuel and food. And those costs, we know, are going through the roof. And so when you say the cost of living is only gone up 1.3, we know it's a lot higher. It's crazy. So I'm getting the hook here, it looks like. I just want to end by saying I appreciate so much the opportunity to come and talk with you. And I hope that you will get engaged in our campaign. We'd love for you to ask more questions. We'll stick around. I'm sure there's a couple other questions that some may have, and we'll be happy to answer those. But I'm asking for your help and support in November. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you.